Again, Murphy's working for Network Rail. This time we were working for the Econ Group, who were tasked with the demolition of the building that's called Willesden Cathedral Junction. If you've been through Willesden, you might well have seen it. It was, again, a life-expired structure that had been sitting there slowly rotting away. Quite a sturdy structure, though. But you can see the access to it was fairly bad. Just looking at it from here, you're bounded by railways on two sides and the A404 on the east side. So the only access was actually for people to walk through that gate there, or the only easy access short of walking down the railways through that gate, which brought you in down here. So not ideal at all. You had the OLE gantry here, which you can see just there. I think another one there, which made life slightly trickier, as you'll see shortly. In this case, the OLE was being lowered because there was no other way of doing it, or for the second phase of the works, the OLE was lowered. For the first phase, it stayed up, but for the second phase, we had to get a plant across here from this car park across there to do the actual demolition work. So it's quite tricky. You also had a series of, signalling cables, high voltage cables all the way around the back side and the left hand side of the structure, or the west side of the structure down here, and all the way along there were cables. And the ground slopes quite significantly. So from this track to this track, there's obviously there's at least the height of required to get clearance under a bridge. So ground's fairly sloping all the way around this structure, which meant we had to approach the structure from this corner. There was physically nowhere else to stand any plant to actually do the demolition works. So the first phase of the works, which was in advance of Christmas, was to get the steelwork down. So as you can see here, the roof had already been stripped off, which is traditional timber roof. That was all stripped off before we really got started on the site. So the first phase of the work was to take down the roof and remove the crane rails within the structure and the old crane that was in there. There was also some sort of test unit that had been put in there. As I understand it, this was used as a test bed for OLE systems, very, very early OLE systems. And within here was some sort of power unit that was used that was to be preserved. So that had to come out as whole as possible to go off to, I think it's gone to London Transport Museum. I could be wrong. It was going somewhere to some museum anyway. So again, you might think that's fairly simple to achieve and just strip off all the steelwork, or to strip out, in particular, these crane rails, which would have slowed down the demolition works. But we had to demonstrate that the structure would remain stable throughout under wind loadings. Well, wind loadings being the predominant issue. So a STAD model was built just to demonstrate that, this is what it's like now with that crane girder in there. The concern being that some of the Murphy's engineer had concerns that if we took this crane rail off, the wall would no longer be stiff enough. So this is why I had to demonstrate that the change wasn't substantial when you take out that crane rail there, which we did. And again, the crane rail and the truss removed, demonstrating that the structure still had sufficient capacity, which it did. Then the mobile crane position sitting in the merchant yard over here to allow us to lift out everything and to lift plant into place as well, which was used to, there's a few bits and pieces in here. There was like a mezzanine level that needed to be demolished. We also had to undertake a plant load assessment on the floor, because as you can see here, there's actually a raised floor in there. So that's kind of a one level up from where the main plant will be operating. But it was a very, very substantial slab, that very substantial, because it had some very heavy loads in there in the past. So it wasn't really too tricky to justify. We could run, I think it was an 8-ton machine around in there to assist with the demolition works. That allowed Econ to lift out all the steelwork. And then we come to the main possession. So track protection all along the south side of the structure, and an access haulage road in, because the plant had to get in to do the demolition, and of course all of the rubble had to get out again. There was a substantial amount of rubble to get out of the site, which put Econ up against it somewhat. But the principle is fairly simple. Work our way in from this end with a kind of a sequential demolition sequence. Take the wall down to first floor level. Take the trusses out. Just keep working your way through the building like that. Track protection here was fairly bog standard track protection. Particular reference to all the services and bits and pieces underneath here. And then this was quite interesting with the access route up. There was another metre height difference between the ground level here and the ground level in the merchant's yard there. So we had to design the ramp system and a full swept path analysis just to demonstrate that we could get the tipper wagons in and out to clear the rubble. And work your way through the structure. And there you go, you can see the demolition at the start. So they're sitting on the track protection on top of the railway there with, I think it was about a 60, 70 ton machine, maybe more actually. And that started working its way in from the corner. And then unfortunately, the next picture I have is at completion. But you can see there that they did it in the time scale allotted to them as well, more importantly. And they left a very, very tidy looking site there, which was excellent. So there's a few bits of learning from both those schemes. The first one being I can't spell late, but the top one is mostly related to Colts Lane. So we had done our demolition sequence, worked out where everything needed to be supported when it's being lifted. But because the crane was being supplied by Ainscote to Murphy's, they'd also done lift plans that didn't take into account where the structure needed to be supported when it's being demolished. So there was quite a bit of back and forth at quite a late stage there to address that and make sure that the lift plans could be updated to match our drawings or vice versa, to make sure everything actually tied together. Both of these schemes were instructed quite late by Network Rail to Murphy's, and then Murphy's then later than perhaps we would have liked instructing to the demolition contractor, which again puts everybody under pressure and makes everything tougher. They were the two key learning points for me from a design perspective anyway.